Hello, I'm Michael Topham, technical writer for digital photo, and welcome to this masterclass video tutorial that's going to be studying Photoshop's vanishing point filter. In this first of two masterclass videos, we'll be taking a look at the basics behind the vanishing point filter, and we'll start to look at the interface to see what tools and options are present. Once we're familiar with the vanishing point interface, we'll see how it can be used with two simple documents. In the second masterclass vanishing point tutorial, we'll move on and use everything we've learnt in this video to see how we can use it creatively to extend a perspective plane. The photograph and subject that we'll be extending is a fisherman's jetty, and we'll be creating a much more pleasing image as a result. More on this a little later on in the second video, but for now let's learn a little bit more about the vanishing point and how we can select it inside Photoshop. If you haven't heard of the vanishing point before, or haven't used it in Photoshop, it's a perspective editing filter that lets us adjust the perspective planes of our images. Introduced into Photoshop CS2, it's featured in Photoshop CS3 and Photoshop CS4, and it can be used creatively and it can be used for repair. Let's first of all see how we can map images to a perspective cube shape, and this will let us explore some of the tools inside the vanishing point interface. On the CD, you'll find a file named cube.jpg, so start off by loading this up into Photoshop. If we fancy adding images to the sides of this cube, it can be quite a tricky and painstaking process. But with the vanishing point, it's made much easier, and it helps us map the image to the perspective planes of the cube. Load up one of your images that you fancy adding to the cube, and then hit Ctrl and A to select it, and then go up into the menu bar, click on Edit, and then go down to Copy, and you could equally hit the shortcut, which is Ctrl+C. Once you've made a copy of one of your images, you can just hit Ctrl and D to deselect the marching ants, and then you can just close down the file. To load up the vanishing point filter, head up to Filter in the menu bar and then scroll down and click on Vanishing Point. You could also hit its keyboard shortcut, which is Alt+Ctrl+V. With the vanishing point filter open on my screen, let's take a look around and see what's on offer. Over on the left, there's 10 tools in a vertical arrangement that we can use. At the top, there's the Edit Plane tool that lets us adjust our perspective planes, and directly below it is the Create Plane tool, which we'll be using first in this video. Underneath this, there's the Marquee tool, the Clone Stamp tool, and there's also the Brush tool. We'll be using these tools in the second video. Further down, there's the Transform tool that can be used to edit images that we paste into the vanishing point filter, and there's also the Eyedropper tool, the Measure tool, and down towards the bottom there's also the Hand tool for moving about the image, and there's the Zoom tool so we can zoom in very easily. Up at the top, you'll find your grid size, and you can use the slider to increase or decrease the size of the grid, but for now we want it to be set at around 100. So I'm just going to select the numbers there and just type in 100 on my keyboard. What we're aiming to do is we're aiming to paste our copied image onto one of the sides of this cube. But before we hit Ctrl and V to paste in the image into the vanishing point filter, we have to create our first plane. Move over to the left and select the Create Plane tool, and the shortcut for this is the letter C. We're going to be using this tool to make 4 points in the corners of the top of this cube. So very carefully, just use the Create Plane tool and make 4 points on the top of this cube, and you'll very soon be able to see that you'll have a grid on your screen a bit like mine. If you need to adjust your plane that you've made, or you're not quite happy with it, just go over to the left, select the Edit Plane tool, and then adjust the corner handles. We're now ready to paste in the image that we copied from earlier. So hit the keyboard shortcut Ctrl and V, and this will paste in the image into the vanishing point. If your image is rather large, like mine, go over to the left and select the transform tool inside the vanishing point, and we can use this to make our image a little bit smaller. Hold down Shift and then drag in one of the corner handles to constrain the proportions and just make it a little bit smaller. Drag your image onto the perspective plane that we created a little bit earlier, and you'll instantly see how the image now matches the plane of the cube. If you need to rotate the image, just hover your cursor over one of the corners and you can very simply rotate it. A useful tip is that you can also tap the images into position by using the cursor keys when you're selected on the transform tool. When you're happy that the image fits the cube, you can move up to the top and then hit OK to apply the effect. So having looked at the vanishing point tools to see how we can add an image to a perspective plane, I'm just going to repeat the process for two other images on the other two sides of the cube using the same technique. This will take me a few minutes to do using the vanishing point filter, so I'll rejoin you once I've done it. And this is the result. I opened up the other two images and repeated the same process, creating planes for the other two sides of the cube using the Create Plane tool in the Vanishing Point filter. Now that I'm happy that I've added the images successfully to the perspective shape of this cube, I can save the image with a new file name by going up to File and then down to Save As. Once you've given the document a new name, click on Save and then click on OK, and then you can just close down the image. As I mentioned before, the vanishing point can also be used for repair, and we briefly saw that there's a clone stamp tool on offer inside the vanishing point interface a little bit earlier. We're going to see how this can be used extensively in the second masterclass video, but to get an idea of how it works beforehand, load up the file shapes.jpg from the CD into your version of Photoshop. You'll see that we've got two coloured shapes here, and we're going to see how we can extend the length of these shapes whilst retaining the perspective. If we used a tool such as the clone stamp tool from the toolbox, we can see that it doesn't actually retain the perspective of this shape, and that's why it's much better to use the vanishing point in this type of situation. To extend the plane of these shapes, first of all go up to Filter and then down to Vanishing Point. Go over to the left and make sure that you're selected on the Create Plane tool, and then draw a plane around the blue shape. You might find that it's quite difficult to view the grid, so it's quite a good idea just to increase the grid size by moving up to the top and then just moving this slider over to the right, settling for a value of around 750. We're now looking to extend the plane, so check you're selected on the Edit Plane tool and then hold down on the top central control point and just drag this out very slightly, and you can drag it out as far as you like, as far as you want to extend the plane. I'm just going to drag it out to about so far and then release, and then we need to go over and select the stamp tool over on the left. Up at the top, make sure that your diameter is set quite high to around 465, the hardness should be set to around 100, and the opacity should also be set to 100. We're going to leave the heel off for the time being, but make sure you've got a tick alongside aligned. We can now set the source point for the clone, and this is very easy to do. We just hold down the Alt key and then just click on the edge of the plane. We can now just begin to clone the pixels a little bit further up whilst retaining the perspective. It can take a few goes to get the hang of it, and you might need to change the source point by holding down Alt and then clicking on the side of the plane. Now I'm just going to increase this blue shape a little bit further up. I'm just going to extend it a little bit further, taking my time, taking different source points for the clone as I work my way up, kind of creating this triangle shape. As you work up with the clone stamp tool, you'll notice how the plane that we created earlier prevents you cloning outside the plane edges, and you should end up with a neat looking clone rather like the one on my screen. It's quite a good idea to make the most of the zoom tool on offer inside the vanishing point, like you would when you're cloning an image inside Photoshop. Once you've tried using the clone stamp tool in the vanishing point filter on the blue shape, you can then experiment with it on the red shape on the other side of the page. Go about it in the same way. Create a plane with the Create Plane tool, then extend the plane by dragging it down. Select the Clone Stamp tool over on the left, and then take a source point for the clone near the edge. You can then just start to extend the shape further down whilst retaining the perspective. So now that we've had a good look at the vanishing point and the tools that can be used inside the interface, it's time to see how it can be used to our advantage with an actual image. In the second masterclass vanishing point video lesson, we'll see how we can extend a jetty overlooking a lake to give it a much more powerful impact. It'll involve a very similar technique to the one we've just looked at with the file shapes.jpg, but rather than using shapes, we'll be working with picture pixels instead. I hope you've enjoyed this first masterclass video lesson that's taken a good look at the vanishing point filter, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video.